Hello constant readers, my name is Emily and welcome back to the Dark Tower Project. Today we're going to be talking about critical reading and what that means. And the reason why I'm starting here is because I think it's really important to set the foundation for the series, for what my goals are moving forward, and just make sure that we're all on the same page, I guess, as we're starting. So if you've watched enough of the videos on my channel, you've probably heard me say the phrase, think critically. I often sort of drop that in under the assumption that it speaks for itself, but I think it is important to talk about what that actually means and what it means to me and how I'm using that phrase, because this is the goal of the series. The goal of the series is to think and read critically. There is actually a foundation for critical thinking, and they define critical thinking as follows. Quote, critical thinking is the intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and/or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. End quote. What does that mean? Critical thinking is basically about improving the quality of your thinking. It is thinking that necessarily entails self-improvement, the desire to self-improve. So in my opinion, good teachers encourage critical thinking. They want their students to reason things out on their own and come to conclusions based on observation and proof. They don't just want their students to uncritically adopt their own perspective. And who are excellent critical thinkers? Children. Small children who have not yet been squashed by the institution are incredible critical thinkers. If you've ever interacted with a small child, they will often question things, like question the natural order of things. They will ask why. And it's this natural curiosity. I think educational institutions really model people into certain types of thinkers, especially like middle school and high school. Middle school and high school are often about getting you to memorize certain things that your society has deemed valuable. They're not asking you to question those structures. It's when you continue your education and you go to a post-secondary school that they have to challenge you, right? They have to begin to get you to deconstruct your beliefs and ask why. Really little kids who haven't been in school are asking why all of the time. If you've ever spent time with a small child, they have probably asked you questions that you have no idea how to answer because they are asking you for something that really has no answer, right? It's not a simple answer. And adults often shut down their questions. Like, it almost sounds absurd sometimes when small children question larger social structures that we as adults have just taken on and have not thought to deconstruct ourselves. And so adults often shut down small children. When children ask questions, their logic often reveals to adults what we don't know. Oftentimes, adults will repeat what we've heard without really looking into responding to the actual question itself. We're denying this quest for understanding that the child is asking for when they ask a question. With all the news about school shootings, right? If a child were to ask, why? Why did that person do that? An adult might respond just to shut down the conversation, or because they're not interested in thinking that through further. An adult might respond because they're a bad person, or because they're a sick person. But that doesn't really answer like the logic of the question, which is, how could somebody get to a place to do so much damage? And for that, we would have to go on a knowledge quest with that child that looks at larger social structures, larger failings of the systems that are supposed to be in place to help people with their mental health, for example, or larger systems that, like patriarchy. And oftentimes these school shooters are men, and the idea of what a man is supposed to achieve, and I guess the ways in which society now sets men up to fail to achieve those expectations and all the emotional baggage that comes with. And when you encounter these questions, you may not have the answers. But critical thinking is about a willingness to be frustrated and confused. It's being willing to see the limits of our knowledge and ultimately being motivated enough to improve ourselves as humans. So according to the Foundation for Critical Thinking, critical thinkers have the following qualities. 1, they attempt to live rationally, reasonably, and empathetically. 2, they are aware of the inherently flawed nature of human thinking when it is left unchecked. 3, they are looking for new concepts to analyze, assess, and improve their own thinking. 4, a critical thinker realizes that no matter how skilled they are as a critical thinker, they can always improve. 5, they realize that they will sometimes fall prey to mistakes in reasoning, human irrationality, prejudices, biases, distortions, uncritically accepted social rules and taboos, self-interests, and vested interests. 6, they will strive to improve the world in whatever ways they can and contribute to a more rational society. 7, they recognize the complexities in striving for a more rational society. 8, they strive to consider the rights and needs of others. And 9, they are ultimately committed to a lifelong practice of self-improvement. Critical thinking is about ultimately self-improvement and a willingness to learn, and for a sort of bookish human like myself, that really speaks to the desire to constantly be learning. And hopefully that sort of resonates with you as well if you are a reader, if you are a bookish person. That's critical thinking. But what is critical reading? Critical reading is applying your critical thinking skills while you read. I'm just going to hold up the first book that's next to me. Authors develop the thinking in their book. We as readers have to translate these ideas, whatever the author meant, into our own meaning. So a critical reader is just someone who's trying to come to terms with a text. And you don't need to know the answers to the questions that you encounter, but you need to be asking the questions. Critical thinking and critical reading, it's a tool so that you're not just accepting what you're told. So how do we actually do the critical reading? How do I do the critical reading when I'm holding the book in my hands? One of the first things that I often do is make note of any words that I don't know. Highlight them, look them up, because maybe that word that you've encountered, having an understanding of what it truly means, shapes what the text is saying. And so in learning this new word, you can reframe what you've read and come to a deeper understanding. So another thing that I do when I am reading critically is making connections. So if I see something in a text that reminds me of something else, I will make note of it. I think the most recent example is I'm reading a book in German right now. In it, this boy tells a story about a little girl on an island. So I was like, that reminds me of Le Petit Prince by Saint-Antoine d'Exupéry. So now I've made this little connection between a German YA thriller and a piece of classic children's literature, and I haven't really sat down and thought about what that means yet, but I've made note of that connection because I might be able to have a deeper understanding of Abel's story that mirrors Le Petit Prince if I actually make that connection, right? The next way that I read critically is I ask questions. If I encounter something really strange, or if I encounter something that doesn't sit right with me, I will make note of it. I will ask myself, why does this make me uncomfortable? And I might even write that into the text, and I will leave that there, and I will think about that. And engaging in that way gets me to think about it as I'm reading forwards in the text. And if you can't form a question, even just highlighting or making note of a passage that confuses you or unsettles you can be really helpful if you want to read critically. You can do outside research to help make sense of these things, to see if other people have your uneasy feeling. Like maybe you go to Goodreads and you look at the reviews after you finish the book and somebody is able to capture in words what didn't sit well with you or what confused you, and you're like, yes! Okay, somebody else was able to articulate this, now I understand, now I can think about that feeling and process it for myself. The other thing, especially with outside research, is if you encounter something and you don't get it, but you feel like maybe it's an historical reference or a cultural reference that you don't get, when you Google it, like for example, that moment in the German book, right? If it turns out that that storytelling and the reference to Le Petit Prince is important, and I didn't get that reference, the rest of the text could be pretty confusing, but if I look it up and people are like, yes, the author is directly drawing on Le Petit Prince because, then when I look that up, I get that cultural reference, all of a sudden I might be able to adjust my reading, adjust my understanding, and reframe what I took away from the story. So doing a little bit of research for things that confuse you, things that you think you're not getting, might be really important and really helpful. The last thing that you can do, I don't do this myself, there's nothing wrong with doing this, but it's just something that I don't personally care about, and that is biographical research. So you can look into the history of the author and like their life experience, what shapes them. Maybe that helps you reframe the text. So for example, Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson is a piece of YA fiction that is about a young girl who is sexually assaulted. Is that a spoiler? I don't know. I think it's important that you know that that's what that text is about anyway. Knowing that the author is a survivor of sexual assault herself might shape your experience with the text, might help you get a better understanding of what is happening in the text and why this narrative felt important and was written in the first place. So that's one example where a biographical reading might be helpful. So the last thing before we go, I often get the comment on a lot of my videos that I'm taking things too seriously. I find this especially with popular fiction, and I find it especially with Stephen King books. I often see people being like, this is just a text for fun. Like, you're wrecking the text by doing the critical thinking, by doing the critical reading. I have to say that these comments always make me laugh because there is no right way or wrong way to read a text or to encounter a text. You may choose to never employ critical thinking or critical reading. That's totally fine. If you want to read text for escapism, you want to just enjoy what's there and not think about it any further than that, that's totally fine, that's totally valid. There's also nothing wrong with analyzing a text, right? There's nothing wrong with trying to engage in deeper ways and enrich my experience with the text if that's what I'm looking to get out of the text. And it's just a wonderful thing that every human being is different, every human being experiences things differently, comes to text from different places, is looking to get different things out of a text, and like, that's totally fine. That's wonderful. For me personally, why I do this, why I love university, why I loved my master's, why I would love to go back for a PhD, is that I love critical reading and critical thinking. I find that fun. This is what we're gonna do with season 2 of the Dark Tower series. I want to ask questions. I want to make connections. I want to look at the intertextuality. I want to talk about some of these terms that in season 1 I just sort of threw up at the camera, and I want to take this opportunity to do a little bit of teaching. Let's imagine that we're a little seminar group and I'm the tutorial leader, and in the comments down below is going to be our group discussion. I hope it doesn't come across as a lecture, basically is what I'm saying. I'm hoping it's coming across as a little bit of teaching with open conversation in the comments, because that is ultimately the goal. So I hope you guys will follow along. I hope you guys will be willing to ask questions. This video was made possible by my patrons. Their support has enabled me to make long-form content, to find the time to do longer-form content like this. I very much appreciate the work that they are enabling me to do, and if you are interested in supporting this channel, in supporting the continuation of this content, tipping me for all of the work that I have put into this series, Patreon is linked in the description box. So until next time, friends, long days and pleasant nights.